everybody, and welcome to this episode of Faith and Family First. I'm your host, Eva Andrade, and I'm excited to bring a guest on the show that's going to undercover some of the stuff we talked about on the show with Jim Hochberg last year when we talked about the Convention of States. What is it? Why should we care? Let's chat about that. Welcome to the show, Robert Kelly.
Well, thanks for having me, Eva.
So we were talking before we started recording about how your name is a famous name, but you're not the famous name.
Well, I'm not in prison, so that's a good start, I think.
Yeah. So I was going to have you, do a rap about this thing, but you said you don't want to do that.
I think for all of your listeners and your watchers, I'm going to spare them that because then we just be getting off on the wrong foot.
But we want to grow the channel, and I think if you could rap it, I think we could get like all these great.
I think I can assure you that my rapping would not grow your channel. So
I don't know. We should try.
For your sake, I mean, I'm an attorney, so I'm not going to give you legal advice. But if I were giving you legal advice, I'd say, spare your listeners and.
All right. Well, okay. So our viewers that are watching this right now, type in the comments if you want to hear him rap, and we'll try to get him back on the show. We'll get some rapping. I'm curious.
Oh man, I was told I wasn't going to be ambushed on this interview.
I know it's supposed to be not a non-hostile one, so I apologize. See, I haven't been on the show for a while because I was out. For my viewers and listeners know that I was out. I had surgery and I was recovering. So that's what it is you're getting all my pent up energy.
All right. Well, hey, let's make this a fun one then.
Okay, let's do it. All right. So, Robert, the reason that we want you on the show today, well, first of all, because you have a wonderful compatriot who thought you'd make a real good guest on the show. So we give a shout out to him for bringing you on the show today.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
All right.
And if you hear voices in the background, people, it is not your meds. So we had, so Jim Hochberg actually was the representative from Hawaii. And so a lot of our viewers and listeners know who that is. But the Convention of States, here in Hawaii, it's like when I talk to people about it, some of them get it. Mm-hmm. Some of them don't get it. I don't know how many people really look at our Constitution and see the wonderful meat that's in there. But before we jump into that, let's get to know Robert Kelly a little bit. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you got involved in this?
Sure, yeah. So I'm an attorney based out of California, and I got involved in Convention of States because I was a starving lawyer at the bottom of the Great Recession. And
does that happen still in Hawaii? Do we still have starving lawyers? I thought this was no, I'm sorry, I won't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, please. No, so I was a starving lawyer at the bottom of the Great Recession, trying to find a job, competing against all these attorneys who had 5, 10, many more years of experience than I did. And so, I'm like, God, what are you calling me to here? Like, it seems like you're shutting all these doors. Like, I want to serve you. I've been working hard to try and get to this place. And it just seems like every door is just shutting in my face now. And I feel like almost immediately after I prayed that prayer, I found out that one of my mentors, Mike Ferris, the former general counsel and CEO, of Alliance Defending Freedom, was starting a new nonprofit organization. And so I reached out to Mike, had the shortest job interview of my life, and I got started as the first attorney over at Convention of States.
I love, first of all, that you started with that because of a lot of our viewers and listeners, they may not be an attorney. They may not be into the political stuff. They may not understand the Convention of States. But I think everybody has that moment where God is calling them to do something, right? That might be a little scary or something. Maybe they're not even sure why the Lord is calling them to do it. But boy, you step out in faith like that and the Lord can do some mighty work.
Well, and sometimes he's the one who actually gets you to take the step, right? I mean, that was certainly the case for me. I thought, hey, I'm going to go work for a big firm. I'm going to go make all this money, and I was thinking of that in a Christian context, which is, how can I use this to serve the body of Christ down the road? But he had a more immediate application of that going to work in the nonprofit world. And so I've been super blessed by that. God's plans are always better than ours, even if we don't see that in the moment. And I've certainly realized that over the last 10 years here.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, so when you were, when did you decide to be an attorney?
Yeah. So I'm still not sure I want to be an attorney.
We need good attorneys. So I'm glad that you did answer the Lord's call.
Well, so it turned out I was going through undergrad and I got a degree in political theory, which is a great degree. Don't get me wrong. I hugely value all of my professors. I went to Mike Ferris's school, Patrick Henry College out in Virginia, got a great education. But the problem with a political theory degree is what are you going to do with it after you graduate, right? Like you can go teach or you can go get an advanced degree in something else. And so I decided, well, God, I'm not sure what this is. Patrick Henry's pretty good at getting people into law school and stuff. So I'll just take the LSAT blind. That's the admissions test for being an attorney. I was like, okay, God, if this is something I'm supposed to do, then, hopefully I have some aptitude at it, open this door. And so I took the LSAT blind, did, reasonably well. And I'm like, okay, like this is a door that seems like it's opening. Let's see if God continues to open that door. So really studied for it, went hard for it, got a good score on the LSAT, went to Pepperdine University out in California, and then again, came out at the bottom of the Great Depression and was, the starving lawyer trying to find a job, which, my parents always told me about the starving artist, but nobody warned you about the starving lawyer.
Well, in this economy, there's probably a lot of people starving, So you're an attorney, you've got this law degree, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about the Convention of States, right? Because it's an organization. So there's the Convention of States that our Constitution talks about, but there's an organization that you work for.
That's
so
right.
How does being an attorney, what's the benefit to being an attorney and having the position that you have?
Sure. Yeah. So, the benefit is, and I went to a school that really did teach the Constitution. Pepperdine did a good job of actually forcing us to read the document. I've had friends who have gone to law school and they barely picked up the Constitution, which, you'd think this is the core law of our land. Like, how do you not read that in law school?
So I have to interrupt you just quickly because here in Hawaii, a lot of people don't know this, that there was a time when the University of Hawaii did not allow you to have the Constitution in your hand to discuss it unless you were in a free speech zone. And so several years ago, Focus on the Family, who's one of the organizations we partner with, actually had one of their PR guys do this whole thing on the zone, where you could look at this was not the Bible. We're talking about the Constitution.
Right.
So I hear you.
Yeah. And so I was blessed to have a degree where I actually got to do that. So that gave me a great foundation to kind of understand, hey, how is our Constitution supposed to work? And I knew a little bit about the amendment process from Article 5, which is exactly what Convention of States is dealing with.
And that's the perfect segue because now we want to jump into the actual meat of, okay, so I know you're going to laugh, but let's just be fair that there may be people watching and listening that maybe they just need a little bit of refresher. So how many amendments do we have in our Constitution?
Sure. So 27 amendments in our current Constitution. The most recent one that we adopted was actually an amendment that was proposed all the way back with the Bill of Rights, which is hard to believe, right? That people think, there were 10 amendments proposed in the Bill of Rights. No, there were 12, and we've now ratified 11 of those, the most recent being the 27th Amendment. So
that's great. See, you're going to be helpful for people that are like, okay, I've been out of school for 20 years, remind me how this goes. And of course, everybody can quote certain amendments, right? Like you talk to people and they're like, oh, I know this amendment or I know that amendment. So let's fast forward to the Fifth Amendment. What is the Fifth Amendment and why is it so important to people?
Well, the Fifth Amendment is the due process clause of the Constitution. But if we want to talk about Article 5, which may be where you're going.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So just to be clear, right? So we've got the Constitution, which is composed of articles, and Article 5 is the amendment process in there. Right. We also have the amendments to the Constitution, the first 10 of which are the Bill of Rights, and the Fifth Amendment dealing with due process of law and all those fun things.
Yeah. So thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry.
I'm glad because I used to do this to Jim Hochberg all the time too. He got used to it because I have so many people that bump into me after they listen to the show and they're like, okay, I have the smart ones that are like, oh, look, you don't need to get into that. Right. But I have more people that come up and go, it was a little over my head, especially our elderly population. And I will tell you, there's a whole missed opportunity for some people who haven't even learned about this stuff. So I'm sorry, that's why we're backing up. But
and I think part of that too, right? Talking about Article 5, we all, at least hope we all learn about, the general amendment process in the Constitution. We all think, hey, Congress can propose amendments by a 2/3 vote of both houses, and then it goes to the states for ratification. But I didn't learn about the second part of Article 5 in the Constitution, which says that, hey, the states have this same power that Congress does.
And this is important because a lot of people talk about the bottleneck, right? There's all these laws that are moving through Congress and there's a bottleneck. Isn't there something we can do? Well, that's what this is referring to. This is how the people can get involved.
Right. That's exactly right. And that's exactly what this was designed to do, right? The genius of our Constitution, right? If you go back and you read the Federalist Papers, you read what Madison wrote, you read what Hamilton wrote as they were selling this document to the American people, what they talked about as the essential genius of our Constitution was this idea of checks and balances, right? That no part of the government could ever be an obstacle to the reforms that the people wanted, right? Because if you do that, if you create that type of situation, whatever that group is, whatever that body is in the government, they're just going to keep accumulating more power and more power and more power.
Sounds familiar.
Right? Yeah. That seems exactly like where we are now.
They were almost prophetic.
Yes. No, well, they understood human nature, right?
Yeah.
And they took that from a biblical worldview. And that's one of the fundamental things that we see right now. That, I mean, half the country can't even agree on what a woman is, which is crazy, right? But when you lose those foundational biblical truths, you lose so much else with them. And so when you look back at our founders, one thing they came at the world from is a biblical worldview. And so they realized that we're all sinners and that even good people, right? Good people, and we, as Christians, we look at that as good's a relative term, right? Only God is good ultimately. But even relatively good people can't be trusted with power because even relatively good people are sinners.
Right.
And when you expose that to power, that brings out that darker side of people.
And we're seeing that. We are seeing it live right now in the people that are in leadership positions. And whenever I do talks with people, I always remind them that this is one of the reasons why it's so important to bring our faith into the public square.
Absolutely.
Because it's really going even back to the founding fathers. They understood that there's something powerful that can happen when you stand on the unchangeable foundation of what we believe as Christians.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's never happened, though. We've never had a convention of states.
So we've never carried one through to completion. This process, though, has been going on since actually even before the Constitution was ratified. So Constitution was proposed in 1787. The ratification process was finished in 1789. But even before the ratification process was completed, Virginia had already submitted the first application for a convention to amend the Constitution to get in a Bill of Rights. And they did that in 1788.
Virginia, we can tease Virginia all we want, but they did some good things.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we would not have the Bill of Rights in the Constitution were it not for Virginia. And I think I would even go so far as to say we would not have the Bill of Rights in the Constitution if Virginia hadn't threatened to use the state amendment process to force Congress to propose the Bill of Rights.
So what do you tell people when you talk to people and you're trying to encourage us to do, because that's really what all this is about, right? We want to have a convention of states.
Right.
Right. Now, some of the negativity we hear about that is, but if you do that, you're going to open this can of worms and we're going to have all this bad stuff. So even some Christians are like, no, let's not do it. Let's not give them the opportunity. So how do you address that? Sure.
Well, let's look at the text of what it talks about and says in Article 5 of the Constitution, because our founders knew what they were doing when they put this in there. We talked about it a little bit already. They were firm believers in checks and balances. And so sometimes when people hear about the convention process, they tend to think of it as, oh, it's this big, giant red reset button. And, if we push that, we're going to blow the whole thing up and we're going to start over. And, there's no way we're going to get it.
Now, is it possible, though? I mean,
No.
Could that happen?
I think there's no realistic chance that could happen. And let's look at the text of Article 5 to see why. So if you read Article 5 of the Constitution, it says Congress, and then it gives the whole first part where Congress gets to propose amendments by a 2/3 vote of both houses. But then after that, it says Congress, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which shall be valid for all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states, or by conventions and 3/4 thereof.
So there's two ways that a bad thing could be stopped through that process.
Yes.
The legislature, which is ultimately the voice of the people, or it should be.
Yeah, I would say there's 3 ways in that process that there are checks to make sure a convention doesn't go out of control. First, 2/3 of the states have to apply for a convention on the same topic. And going back to what you said earlier, that's exactly why we haven't had a convention so far, is because the states have not been able to get 2/3 of them on the same page as to what types of amendments they want to be proposed to the Constitution.
Now, when Jim was on the show, he actually shared some of the stuff that what was it? It was like a fake convention or something, right? I mean, it was
a
like
simulation.
Yeah, simulation. Okay, yeah. So better word. See, that's why we have attorneys on the show, because they got to make sure we're using the right words. But yeah, so I mean, so he showed what some of those things were, and it was interesting because you had different ideas from different people, and that's what made it to me a very fascinating process.
Yeah.
So it's not like one thing and then everybody would be forced to have that thing.
Right. Yeah. So the idea behind a convention is you need to get the states together to discuss exactly what the text of the amendment is going to be. But the states need to agree on the topics that they're going to discuss. So in our application, we have 3 topics. We have fiscal restraints on the federal government. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we all recognize that that's a need.
Yeah. Everyone listening is like, well, okay.
Right. Common sense, right?
Right,
Stuff
right.
but Congress isn't doing it, right? And they've had numerous opportunities
Well,
to do
are we going to see what Doge is going to do along those lines?
I mean, hey,
Well.
you know, I don't think it hurts to throw that out there. But I mean, even if you look back to the first Trump administration, right, spending went up like crazy. And
Well, and it goes back to the point you made. I mean, we don't want to have government be the ones that are going to consistently do this stuff. It should be the people. The
Right.
people should be able to say.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So continue your other
So
two
first
ideas.
topic
Yeah.
is fiscal restraints, which is critically important. I mean, otherwise the government's just going to continue to spend us into the ground. And, you know, I hope Doge makes a difference. But I mean, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars in our national debt right now. Even if they cut millions and billions out of what the federal government's spending, we're still going to continue digging ourselves into a hole.
In fact, as we're having this conversation right now, it's going up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably gone up,
Yeah,
a couple hundred million
yeah.
just in the course of this conversation right now.
Right.
But so that's the first topic, is fiscal restraints. The second topic is limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government.
Again, you're going to get a round of applause.
Right. Well, and again, this is something that the overwhelming majority of the American people support. If you look at polling around this, something around 2/3 of the American people believe that the federal government is too large and it does too much. And I think this goes back to your gridlock point earlier, right? The reason why we have so much gridlock in Congress, the reason why, you know, I was told by everybody that this election was the most important election of my lifetime, and that they told me that about the one in 2020 before this, and I guarantee you they're going to tell me it about the one in 4 years from now in 2028, is because the federal government controls so much of our lives, and it wasn't intended to do that.
Right.
So we shouldn't be surprised that we're having this gridlock, that we're having these structural problems in our government, because we're not following the structure that was designed originally by our framers.
Right. And the third thing?
Third thing is term limits, right? We need to get the career politicians out of DC so that we can get fresh blood in there, so that people can't make it their livelihood to pass laws and become experts in that without getting back in touch with the people and actually representing them.
You know what I love about this? So anyone listening right now, even someone who doesn't have a faith base like we do, would be okay with those 3 points. So you're not talking about making everybody in the United States Christian. You're not talking about, you know, holding people accountable to what the Bible says, although that is the foundation for what we believe. These are things that anybody from either political party could really sink their teeth into.
Absolutely. And they do, right? If you look consistently at polling, over 50% of both parties support fiscal restraints, over 50% of both parties support term limits, and over 50% of both parties think the federal government is too large. And that's the idea that we're trying to implement here with Convention of States. And this goes back to your broader question about, hey, how do we know the convention's not going to run away? How do we know this whole process isn't going to blow up? Well, because we need to get past that 2/3 threshold, right? And that means we're going to need people from both sides of the aisle. That means, yes, there are going to be Christians who have a seat at the table, but there are going to be people who aren't Christians, but share those same underlying commitment limited government that we do.
Except here in Hawaii, it'll be more than 2/3 because we've got such a few Republicans. So it would definitely have to be bipartisan here in Hawaii because we'd have to get a big majority support from the Democrats.
Right. Yeah. And again, that was how the Constitution was designed, right? The Constitution defines our form of government. It wasn't something that the founders wanted to be changed easily. So this was intentional. And this goes back to the point, which is, hey, how do we know a convention is not going to run away? Well, because the founders were so protective of this Constitution, of this document that they had literally fought for, that literally some of them had given up their lives for. They were not just going to make this something that there was this big giant reset button that we could press inadvertently. I think that does a disservice to our founders, their wisdom to treat Article 5 that way.
So if people are listening now and they're starting to think, okay, this is a really great thing. I mean, what can people do?
Yeah. Well, first thing I'd encourage them to do is to learn more about this process. And they can do that by going to conventionestates.com. We have a ton of resources available on our website there. They can sign our petition if you know that this is something you support. You can also go check out the number of people we've had who have endorsed our efforts. So we have people like Dr. James Dobson, who's a big Convention of States supporter. We also have on staff, we have Mike Ferris, who again has done a huge amount to fight for the family and to fight for religious liberty across the country. We have Rick Santorum, who has done great work when he was in Congress, serving on the Senate side, doing advancing pro-life causes and pro-family values in that process. And there's tons more. Ben Shapiro. I mean, I could list hundreds of other names of prominent people who have endorsed us. So I'd encourage people to go check that out if you're curious to see, like, hey, maybe you're struggling a little bit with this. Seems like it's really in the weeds. Like I'm not an attorney. I don't know how to, is this a good idea? Is this not? Well, go check out what some of those people have said, and I think that will provide some reassurance for some of your viewers.
Now, this is good, and I know that you kind of touched this already, but I just want to make sure that people get the process. They understand the process. Okay, so where are we at in the process, and what needs to happen?
Sure, yeah. So going back to the text of Article 5, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states. So the first thing we have to do is get 2/3 of the states to agree on the topic that they want for a convention. And right now we've got 19 states that are committed to those 3 topics that we talked about.
And so what have they done that so how do we say they're committed? What did they do? Did they go, they went through what process?
Yeah. So the legislature of the state has to adopt a piece of legislation that's called an application. And it's usually done through the resolution process. So if you're into legislative procedure, it's usually considered a resolution. Doesn't need the governor's signature, for example, but both houses of the state legislature have to pass it. And so we've done that in 19 states. Now, if you're doing quick math in your head here, you're thinking, okay, 2/3 of 50 is, okay, it's 34. So you need 34 states to call a convention. We've got 19 right now, so we're over halfway there. And I think we're going to see several more come on board this year. South Dakota is right on the verge of passage.
That was going to be my next question. So you obviously have some that are in the process, maybe that are going to move there. So we can't. You're not God. You can't look through the future and know exactly what's going to happen. But you've got a good feeling about a few states, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, right. We only can do what we can do, which is to be faithful to what God has called us to do, and the results are ultimately in His hands. But that doesn't stop us from planning, right? Although we hold those plans loosely and always surrender them to Him because He knows what's best.
But you might have somebody here in Hawaii that are like, well, could we get the process started in Hawaii? And so it would start with them talking to their legislator and getting a potential resolution.
That's right. Yes.
Introduced.
And I would encourage you, if you go to our website and you sign up at conventionestates.com, you sign our petition there.
Suggested language.
Yes. Yeah. So yes. So there's language in there that actually sends to your legislator that tells them, hey, this is how the process works. I'm your constituent. I'd like you to work on this. The other big thing it does is it gets you plugged in with our team of volunteers here in Hawaii. We've got a great team led by Mark White, and I know they would love to have a number of people jump on board with them and join them. In fact, we're going to the Capitol tomorrow to go be there for the opening of the legislative session. So
that's great. And we will put, those of you, send me an email, eva@hawaiifamilyforum.org. And if you're interested, I can make sure that Mark gets the information. So please do that if you're interested. So I can tell you just from my own thought process that I would say the majority of Hawaii legislators would probably not necessarily be interested in something like this. But I always tell people, don't let that stop you, because we need to, one, build relationship with our own legislators. And so people can right now talk to their own legislator and say that they want to see something like this, because I think that sometimes when the grassroots comes up and the talking starts happening, right? And then legislators are like, my constituents talked about this, and that will help ultimately when there is a resolution.
Right. And two things I would say to that too are, I think, one, you've got to start with where you're at, right? It's the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? And if people aren't willing to stand up for what they believe in, then of course we're never going to get there. But that's on us, right? If we don't stand up and do that. So we need to stand up and do it, even if we don't see the path forward, because God may lay that down for us.
Right.
But second, and more direct, realpolitik, if you will, is our founders did not design this process to be like, oh, our legislatures are just going to do this because they're so altruistic.
Right.
They designed this process to be, hey, the state governments are going to be fighting the federal government for power because they both want power. And so that is always the pitch you can make to your state legislator is, hey, we want you guys to make more decisions for us here at home. We want you guys to take power. We want you guys to have more power here in Wyoming. Wow.
Wyoming.
Wow.
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. It's a long flight to get out here, you guys. I'm still got some jet lag.
I know. For those of us that live here that have to make this flight all the time, we just kind of laugh and scoff. And people are like, oh, it takes so long to get to Hawaii. We're like, yeah, we always have to take, most of us have to take the red eye to get out of here, right?
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to be doing that on Friday.
So we appreciate that.
Hawaii.
Yes.
Which, by the way, thank you all for how graciously you've hosted me. I just want to say I've come to Hawaii a couple times now, and I travel to a lot of states, and I don't say this to every state. So
okay.
But I do want to tell you guys, and I want to say thank you to you and to everyone else here. You guys have been the most hospitable state that I have traveled to. So thank you so much for making me feel welcome here.
That, it's beautiful. That's why I will never leave, because I do feel it. I go to the mainland a lot of time for meetings, and I just, it's not home for me. This is home. So I do appreciate that. So here's the call to action, I would say, based on the conversation we have, because we're running out of time, as we always do. Number one, I think that the question that every person here in the state of Hawaii should ask themselves, is the government representing me in the way that I think we should be represented as people, right? And I think that most people would answer that question. I think no.
Yeah.
And so your question then, or your answer to that question is, do I keep it the way it is then and never get involved? Or is there something I can do about this?
Yep.
And the only thing would be to get involved with something like the Convention of States and to make it happen, because then the people have their way, right, of bringing their voice. So that's number one. Then number two is getting to know what the Convention of State is. Go to your website, get information. Are you guys a 501c3?
So we're a 501c4 organization. And so we are a nonprofit. You can go there. You can learn more about what that is. And there's a whole separate conversation we can have about types of nonprofits.
No, Jim and I have done that, because a lot of people, he was representing Hawaii Family Advocates, which was at the time a C4. And Hawaii Family Forum is a C3. So we used to talk about what he could do that I couldn't do and all of that. Because there's a lot of stuff we can do together that's okay. Education, which is what we're doing today.
Yes.
We're just educating. So as we start running out of our time today, first of all, I just want to thank you for what you're doing and for saying yes to the Lord and getting involved in the legal community, because we really need strong Christian attorneys in this great country.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for saying yes. We thank you, Mark, for behind camera for bringing him on and letting us open up this conversation about the Convention of States. And for those of you viewers and listeners, thank you for spending time with us today. Make sure you stay tuned for us next week. I'm going to walk you through the legislative process. I'm actually going to take a camera with me tomorrow, and you guys are going to see what it's like so that when we call action, you'll be able to do that. And we will see you hopefully again one of these days.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Eva.
Thank you so much. Mahalo, everybody. We'll see you next week.